All right, this webinar is titled Biotics, and instead of probiotics, I've chosen the title Biotics because we have different types of biotics and we've learned a lot in the last few years. So what are biotics? They are organic substances that act in the gastrointestinal tract, including humans, to prevent disease and to promote the health of their host, which is us. They can be helpful for many different health issues, including diarrhea associated with antibiotics or C. diff infection, IBS, inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's and UC, pancreatitis, necrotizing enterocolitis, allergic diseases, especially of the skin, like dermatitis and eczema, even lactose intolerance, viral infections like the cold and the flu, colon cancer, obesity, and neurological disorders like anxiety and depression. So there are different types of biotics. There are 4 primary types that have been identified so far. The first one is probiotics, and this is a term that most of us are familiar with by now. It started being used in the 1960s, and we've been studying probiotics since then. Then the term prebiotics, which was first introduced in the mid-1990s, came about. And then we have postbiotics and synbiotics, and studies on those 2 types of organisms have just begun within the last 5 years. So pretty new science there, and we'll dive into each one of those. So the most common one that most everybody knows about is probiotics. These are live, friendly, or beneficial bacteria or microorganisms, and they live in our gut, and we have trillions of these living in our gut. We have actually more microorganisms in our gut than we have cells in our body. They are essential to our health. So some of the things they do is they synthesize vitamins like B vitamins and vitamin K. They improve our digestion. They enhance our immune function. They help maintain healthy weight, improve our skin and oral health, and they produce chemicals used by our neurotransmitters that affect mental health. So pretty important little beings. The most common genus are in the lactobacillus and bifidobacteria areas, but then we also have found other important genus like Saccharomyces, Streptococcus, Enterococcus, Escherichia, and Bacillus. And within each of these genus, there are multiple species, and a species may also have many strains. So very much living organisms. So again, on probiotics, most probiotic strains are going to be helpful with general digestive issues like diarrhea and constipation, also immune function to help us in fighting off harmful microorganisms. But other health benefits that have been identified for specific strains, Bacillus laterosporus may be especially helpful if you're trying to fight off a candida infection, which is yeast. Bifidobacterium breve and Bifidobacterium longum may be especially helpful after we've taken antibiotics to help us restore good bacteria, because remember, antibiotics kill all bacteria, whether it's good or bad. Bifidobacterium bifidum appears to play a role in immune function and help with allergy response. So it may reduce our overreaction to some of these allergens. Bifidobacterium bifidum, Lactobacillus casei, and Lactobacillus helveticus have been shown to provide benefits for depression, anxiety, and other mood issues. Bifidobacterium lactis neutralizes gliadin, which is the protein in wheat that's responsible for gluten sensitivity. And then Streptococcus thermophiles breaks down casein, which is the protein in cheese that causes, in all dairy really, that causes allergies. And then Lactobacillus johnsoni and Lactobacillus reuteri are effective in fighting H. pylori bacteria. And Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG actually increases glucose control. So that helps us promote healthy blood sugar levels. We can get probiotics from foods. They occur naturally in fermented foods. So those are things like yogurt. You want to make sure that yogurt has live cultures. It's not like processed, sweetened, crappy yogurt. Sauerkraut. Tempeh, which is a soy product, a fermented soy product. Miso, which is also fermented soy. Kimchi. Kefir, which is basically drinkable yogurt. And then kombucha, which is another beverage. Again, you want to make sure it has live cultures. The thing with the yogurt and kombucha is that there can be some live cultures produced from the making of the product. A lot of times the live cultures are added, and it's important to note that anything with live cultures added to it or produced by it, as soon as that product is packaged and stored, those live cultures start to die. So you want to be aware of that if you're using those as sources of probiotics. And then certain aged cheeses. So that second term, prebiotics, which is newer. Prebiotics are specific types of carbohydrates that have non-digestible fiber, meaning humans, we can't break down the fiber, we don't digest it. But it provides food for those good gut bacteria. They actually consume that fiber. So that's what a prebiotic is. Lots of foods have prebiotic fiber. So sulfur vegetables like leeks, onions, and garlic. Baobab fruit. Acacia, which is a gum. It's used as a texturizer in a lot of products. Dandelion root, dandelion leaf. Chicory root, really high in inulin. Some fruits and vegetables like apples, bananas, berries, asparagus, cabbage, and coconut. Jerusalem artichokes. Jicama, radishes, and sweet potato, some of your root veggies. Cacao, flaxseed, hemp seed, chia seed. So seeds are really good for you. And seaweed. And barley and oats. So those are the foods that help feed our good gut bacteria. So then some of those newer terms. Postbiotics. What are postbiotics? Well, postbiotics are bioactive compounds that are produced whenever that probiotic microorganism consumes that prebiotic starch within our gastrointestinal tract. And or they can also be produced when we apply certain processes to bacteria in a laboratory. So different types of postbiotics include short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, propionate, and acetate, lipopolysaccharides, exopolysaccharides. Enzymes, amino acids, and peptides are also postbiotics. Cell wall fragments, lysates and supernatants, and vitamins. All of those are postbiotics. And the studies on probiotics and postbiotics actually indicate that postbiotics contribute significantly to those positive health benefits within our GI. Some of those specific actions include reducing inflammation, promoting intestinal wall integrity. So this is, healing a leaky gut or preventing a leaky gut. Improving insulin sensitivity and glucose control. So there's that healthy blood sugar management. And exerting anti-carcinogenic effects. So preventing for cancer. And as we study postbiotics and we learn about the different types and the health benefits they have, it could be that a lot of the health benefits that we've been attributing to probiotics all these years actually come from the postbiotic compounds themselves. So we're still studying and still figuring that out. Food source considerations. It's important to keep in mind that different things will affect the quantity and quality of probiotics in foods. So the food characteristic, such as its acidity, the water activity, or other chemical compounds in the food, as well as storage conditions, moisture, temperature, and how permeable the package is to oxygen or time, are all going to impose challenges on the proper survival of probiotics in foods during production and storage. So again, be cognizant of that if you're using foods for your sources of probiotics. Some of these same characteristics or conditions may actually encourage the production of certain postbiotic compounds. And what that means is that the alterations happening to the probiotics in that food may actually mimic, if you will, the probiotic consuming the prebiotic and producing that postbiotic compound, and so it may accelerate the production of that postbiotic compound. Then gut health may be most positively impacted by combining probiotic and prebiotic foods together. As we just said, that prebiotics are the food that those probiotics eat in order to create postbiotics. So it makes sense that if you put them together, that you're going to make it easier for those gut bacteria to find their food and create those postbiotic compounds. So here are some suggestions for compounds that we can combine together that give that probiotic prebiotic kind of boost. You can just add berries, chia seeds, or flax seeds to yogurt. You can make Japanese pancakes, which are yummy, 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 that have cabbage and miso. You can cook apples and hemp seeds in your oatmeal. Add a small side of garlic sauerkraut to a meal. Make an herbal beverage of dandelion root and cacao. Those are all ways to combine probiotics and prebiotics. So what are synbiotics? Synbiotics are specific combinations or mixtures of prebiotics with probiotics where the prebiotic selectively favors the growth and metabolite production of the probiotic to affect the microbiome in a specific way to provide specific health benefits to the host. So what does that mean? It means that we're still studying combinations of foods, basically. We're looking at which probiotics like to eat which prebiotics and which postbiotics then get created. And in doing that, we can figure out the right combinations to target the specific health issues that we're trying to target. So, should note that this definition of synbiotics is going back and forth and still being considered. There's a committee called the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics that is looking at this definition. They're trying to determine whether, compounds should be further classified as complementary versus synergistic, which is kind of a nit. But they're also looking at naturally occurring versus laboratory created type of things. So very much still being studied. And synbiotics are being studied for their ability to balance gut microbiota and even to restore a compromised microbiome. So that's a good thing. If we can accelerate that healing of somebody who has a compromised microbiome, then there's all sorts of health benefits for that. So in addition to gut health, synbiotics are being studied for their ability to improve neurodegenerative disorders like memory, dementia, type 2 diabetes, other metabolic disorders, and obesity. Now, one thing that we have figured out and has to be considered is specific combinations, even if they're studied in like a laboratory, the effects may vary once you put them in a person because that person's genetics or health status, meaning how healthy or unhealthy their gut is, could actually change the way that that mixture acts. It may be different than it did in the laboratory. So that's something we kind of always have to think about. So what about supplements? Well, the first thing we need to think about is the purpose of a supplement is to be a complement or an enhancement. Shouldn't be our sole source. So we still want to be trying to get probiotics and prebiotics daily from the foods we eat. When we use supplements, the best kind of rule of thumb is know which strains we're using and why, and make sure that their characteristics are targeting maybe a specific acute health issue that we have, rather than just using a supplement in a general way to boost gut health. Again, be aware that the quality and type of supplements are going to vary widely. So if you look out at the products out there, you have refrigerated versus non-refrigerated. You have traditional versus spore-based. You have capsules versus liquids. You have enteric-coated capsules, non-coated capsules. And, they've all been studied. The research is really kind of all over the place. When probiotics first came out, they were all refrigerated. That was the only way to preserve the strains. Now we have all these non-refrigerated ones, and whether or not they're as effective is kind of up for grabs. A spore-based probiotic is grown a different way, supposedly more robust and better able to survive shelf life. So just things that ought to be considered when you're buying a supplement. Then the biggie is that in order for probiotics to work, they really need to reach the large intestine or the colon. And that's at the very end of that gastrointestinal tract and that digestive process. So they're going through our stomach first and our small intestine, and they're going to be hit with stomach acid and then all the bile salts and enzymes in the digestive process. And it's a difficult process to survive. So a lot of studies have shown really inconsistent and contradicting results about whether that probiotic survives long enough to get to the colon where it needs to go. And that may vary by strain. It may also vary by, again, the individual person's gut health status. So just again, something else to consider, because probiotics, especially good quality ones, can be expensive. So you want to make sure that they're doing what you want them to do. When you look at probiotic supplements, be aware that a good quality product is going to list the specific bacteria genus and species, and it's going to include the CFU, which is the colony forming units that it provides. And those can range from tens of thousands to millions to billions. It may also include a specific strain of that species. And remember, we mentioned that any strain that has specifically been studied will also usually be identified by a number. So if you see a number, you know that that specific species strain has been studied. That doesn't mean that a strain that doesn't have a number isn't valid. It just means it hasn't been included in studies. And then also be aware that probiotic supplements, especially those with large numbers of organisms, which again is what we would do for, quote, general maintenance, can cause GI distress. So other considerations. People with weak or compromised immune systems may be more susceptible to the negative side effects of biotics, that GI distress, and they should be cautious about both increasing probiotic and prebiotic foods as well as using supplements. So not to say don't do it, but be cautious. Maybe do small amounts at a time. Maybe foods would be better than supplements, that kind of thing. And some of those people would be people who have recently had surgery, people who have structural heart disorders, people with digestive tract disorders, which, probiotics and prebiotics are going to be helpful for these people. You just need to be cautious about the quantities and the types that you're adding. Pregnant people and children. So to recap, probiotics are beneficial bacteria that live in our gut. They're part of our microbiome. They work in conjunction with prebiotics, which are specific types of carbohydrates or non-digestible fiber that feed them. We can get both probiotics and prebiotics from specific types of food. Postbiotics are compounds or substances that are produced when the probiotics eat the prebiotics or by applying certain processes to probiotics in a lab. Synbiotics are specific combinations of probiotics and prebiotics that work together to achieve a specific health benefit. And supplements may not provide the most bioavailable source of probiotics. And then there's a list of some of the journals that, articles that I used for the information on postbiotics and synbiotics. So hopefully this has been informative. You learned a little bit more about your probiotics and what makes them tick. And thank you, and see you next time.